Hey, what's happening everybody? How are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel. And believe it or not, I'm still not yet done talking about the Nintendo Direct Mini from this past Monday, July 20th, and all of the reactions and all of the good and all of the bad that came from that Nintendo Direct Mini. The partner presentation, of course, because honestly, there's just still a lot to talk about, and I have a lot of thoughts in my head about what that meant. What it meant for Nintendo to show it the way they did, to call it a Nintendo Direct, for it to not go well, and honestly, all of the fallout and the reactions from that Nintendo Direct Mini. So I know this will be the third video I've made on this topic since the thing happened, like I said, almost a week ago on Monday, July 20th, but honestly, it's really one of the only things going on with Nintendo, right? I mean, in 2020, we're so constantly starved for news and updates about Nintendo and what they're doing, new game announcements, rumors about Mario remasters, where are the Nintendo Directs? It's been crazy, and so when a Nintendo Direct of any kind or size does happen, it's the one thing in the world of Nintendo we have to talk about, and especially when it's as polarizing as this Nintendo Direct Mini Partner Showcase July 2020 was, it just warrants further conversation and further exploration, because honestly, as a Nintendo fan, I can't stop thinking about what Nintendo is doing, and the fact that all we got was this 8-minute Direct that was really just not satisfying. And of course, when I say not satisfying, I do mean, for me, it wasn't satisfying, but also, let's be real, most people were not satisfied with that. I understand if you might be in the tiny, itty-bitty minority of people who thinks that that Direct was great, or were just completely satisfied solely because of Shin Megami Tensei. And again, I'll say this again, if that's you, if you loved it because of that stuff, then that's fine, that's great. None of us are trying to take that away from you. But, you know, in the grand scheme of things, when you look at how people have reacted, what Nintendo's been doing and not doing in 2020, and where we were left as Nintendo fans coming out of the end of that Nintendo Direct, it wasn't a good show. It didn't satisfy people's needs. It didn't make a lot of us happy. And, you know, I'll constantly have to remind you guys, for any newcomers to the video, I'm not the person who's out here demanding and yelling at Nintendo to just give me, me, stuff just for me. But after so long, 7 months into the year, pandemic or no, it's a little silly that really this was all we got in July, was this little 8-minute show. And so that, the fallout of that, the leftover, the remnants of what Nintendo is in 2020 coming out of that show is what really has me surprised and also a little bit worried. Now, in my last video, I mentioned how I'm actually feeling pretty optimistic that Nintendo does still have some things to show us in 2020. I just simply can't imagine that the last thing they're going to talk to us about or show us is that 8-minute Direct presentation with 5 third-party games that simply, for the most part, just wasn't a satisfying show. That doesn't feel like the end of Nintendo's 2020 to me. I could be wrong. I'm just telling you my gut feeling, and my optimism says they're probably going to have something else to show. I think that Nintendo has a plan that they have not yet shown us. Whether that's more partner presentations with more significant games, first-party Nintendo Directs, full Nintendo Directs, Twitter announcements out the wazoo, like something else Nintendo is going to do in 2020. I do believe that. However, that still doesn't mean that we have a potentially negative or scary situation to look at right now before we see if that's true. And so with the last video, I wanted to explore the optimistic viewpoint of I think Nintendo has a plan, but I think it's also worth exploring in this video how maybe that's not the case, or even if it is the case, what does the community's reaction look like between the release of this last Direct and whenever Nintendo does decide to show us their next stuff? And honestly, to answer that question, all we have to do is simply look at the community's reactions, which is what I was talking about in the first couple of minutes here. The fact that most people in the community, you know, the gaming community and the Nintendo fan community, are just not happy. And after so long, people are finally catching up to the messaging I was kind of delivering earlier on in the year, that it seems like Nintendo might not be doing a whole lot in 2020. You know, whether you want to say that they've, quote, given up with Nintendo on 2020 or not, that's one thing. If you want to say that they're maybe just paving the way for Sony and Microsoft to have an uncontested launch of their new consoles, stuff that I've talked about and made videos about before, people are finally starting to realize that that might be what's happening with Nintendo this year. And because of that, and because the only thing they gave us was this little drip morsel 8-minute Nintendo Direct that was just not good, it's got people worried, and it definitely has people upset. And I mean, you know, proof of that could be from someone with my perspective as a YouTuber that focuses mostly on Nintendo. That means I see and engage in a lot of conversation, both on my YouTube videos and on the comments on those videos, as well as other YouTubers and people I know and follow, and of course on Twitter. And there's conversations abound that are just not positive and show what people are really thinking about Nintendo right now, and how people are running out of patience. Now, I'm not going to say whether or not people are justified to run out of patience just yet. My whole last video was me discussing my optimistic point of view that I think they might still have a plan. But when we just look objectively at how people are reacting like they're basically just out of patience when it comes to Nintendo. I see a lot of reactions and comments on Twitter and on my YouTube videos that kind of read like this one from my last video. Nintendo's heart is deceased. What remains is crap. That is the only response we are getting from the, quote, actions that they are making. No company games except a copy-clone Zelda game. Nintendo is like a deceased billionaire. We are still talking of the great times, quote, before, but the case is that the company heart is no longer alive. Now, obviously that sounds a little bit overly melodramatic, and there's also a good chance that maybe English is not this person's first language, so I do want to point that out with some of the broken sentence structure. But the point is, when you look at what this person is actually saying, you know, overly dramatic or not, I get it. I understand what he's trying to say here. And I do know that it reflects a lot of what a lot of other people are feeling right now. You know, the whole concept of Nintendo's heart is deceased. What he's trying to say is that his perception as a fan is that the beating heart and the soul of what makes Nintendo good in their game development and their game releases, the passion they have for great gameplay and surprising and exciting the fan base, that's what he is seeing as right now is gone in 2020. Again, in reaction to this last Nintendo Direct Mini. And I know, without a shadow of a doubt, that he speaks for a lot of other people who are Nintendo fans right now, who are wondering what the heck is going on, what is Nintendo doing, and also probably struggling with the fact that Nintendo hasn't been communicating what's been going on. I mean, that's something I've been saying since very early in the year, you guys. When this pandemic was first rolling out, things were looking kind of sketch for the release schedule for Nintendo. We hadn't seen the Nintendo Directs we were expecting, and everyone was starting to get a little crazy, and I was like, hey, Nintendo, I understand that things are weird and you probably have to change what you're doing. That's completely okay. But it will come to a point where you should at least be willing to talk to people about it. And then, of course, Nintendo really only ended up talking to their darned investors about it. They have not yet really addressed us, the gaming community. Even some of their recent quotes about what's going on with COVID and if it's meeting their games are going to meet the release schedule or not, and they keep going back on their own words and their own quotes. It's been very confusing and very frustrating, but still, these are only happening in interviews and to investors. They've not yet been willing to be forthcoming to us. I mean, all they really would need to do is put, you know, like a twit longer kind of thing on Twitter. I mean, they wouldn't want to use twit longer. They could just do a printed statement like plenty of other game companies have done about delays this year and just say, hey, to the Nintendo fan community, this is what's going on. You know, XYZ is making things weird. We're trying our best. Here's what you can expect. Things might be delayed. And maybe just tell us if 2020 is a wash like a lot of us expect it might be. Again, I want to believe that Nintendo still has a plan for this year. But because I could also be wrong, that's where I start to consider if you've got nothing else for 2020, if my theory that you have a plan is wrong, that's when you want to come out and tell people. And Nintendo's constant unwillingness to relay these messages and to be transparent and tell us what's going on is part of what the problem is. It's not so much the lack of games or lack of Nintendo Directs, because we all already know the pandemic is the reason. It's the fact that Nintendo won't just tell us. And even though the last two Nintendo Direct Minis, they had the little blurb at the beginning about, oh, COVID might change some dates or whatever. It's like, okay, that's better than nothing, yes, but it's not really enough. It's not truly translating the message. That's just a, hey, just FYI, maybe sorta kinda, this could be the thing. I mean, that's all it is. It's so stock statement, and it's just a little blurb before Direct. It just really doesn't get the job done, personally, at least for me, and I would think that probably for most of you guys as well. And if I was to bring this back around to the idea of the fallout and reactions to Nintendo right now, and coming off of that last Nintendo Direct Mini, I think that it's important to note that one of the big negatives happening right now that could potentially get worse throughout the year is honestly just consumer confidence and consumer faith, and just fan faith in the company. I mean, right now, morale is so very low for people who are diehard Nintendo fans. I mean, I'm a diehard Nintendo fan, but I still am willing to understand the pandemic influence here, and I also play on my other devices. And so I've been playing Ghost of Tsushima like crazy lately. I have been playing Paper Mario 2, to be fair, a pretty decent new Nintendo game. So thank God we've gotten 2 Nintendo games this year, right? But I've been playing Ghost of Tsushima, I've been playing The Last of Us Part 2, I'm really excited for Cyberpunk coming up soon, I will be playing Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 games this year. So like, if Nintendo is really crapping the bed and giving us nothing else, I still have other stuff to keep me satisfied. But as a diehard Nintendo fan, yeah, I mean, I still have a little bit of shaken confidence in the company, simply because they just won't talk to us about what's going on. And I think that that's something that a lot of people want to hear. And the longer Nintendo goes without showing us games, without giving us proper Nintendo Directs, and without talking to us about what's going on and just being honest and transparent, like that's not a bad thing to do, Nintendo, the longer they go without doing those things, the more the morale gets low. And when morale is low, that can be bad for a company long term. Now, here's the thing though. Right now, Nintendo is still selling Switches like they're curing cancer, and I think for that reason, that's one of the reasons they don't want to be transparent, which is annoying, but it is understandable from a business perspective, because their concern would be, if we tell people we have nothing to release for the rest of the year, are they going to stop buying our Nintendo Switches? And since we're not releasing games, selling Nintendo Switches is the only thing we have to sell in 2020, and they are somehow still managing to break records with their sales, despite having no games to play right now, and they definitely want to keep that up. And so I understand that perspective, but it does get a little bit frustrating from the consumer side, right? From the fan side, like myself and a lot of you. And so the whole thing just adds up to a big, ugly mess. It's just messy right now, and it is ugly as far as the community's reaction, the fallout, the conversations happening. It's very unfortunate. You know, that comment that I read in this video, I've seen tons of comments like that on all of my videos throughout the whole year, and especially recently, and even more especially after that Nintendo Direct Mini. People are just not happy. Some people are too extreme, and they're too toxic about it. Other people, even the ones who are being very reasonable about it, still are very upset, and it's those people who I understand. I don't understand the people who are swearing and getting angry, but I do understand the people who are reasonable but still upset, because that's what I tend to think myself as. I feel like I have a pretty reasonable approach and I understand the situation, but I'm frustrated by Nintendo's lack of communication. To me, it's just really still one of the biggest problems going on, and I hope that they fix it soon. So these are my thoughts and my theories and my opinions about what's going on and where Nintendo finds themselves now that this Nintendo Direct Mini Partner Showcase presentation, July 2020, has wrapped up, several days ago, and no one's happy about it, and people are still waiting. I'm going to fall back on what I said in my last video. I still want to believe they have a plan. I want to believe that next month in August, they're going to give us something else significant. Whether it's just tweeting out a major game or a major piece of news about a game like Breath of the Wild, or whether it's giving us a Nintendo Direct, or whether it's just being transparent about what they're doing, I feel like something is going to happen in August. Because they cannot rely on that 8 minutes of 5 underwhelming games and think that they've just, washed their hands of any responsibility for anything for the rest of the year. If these Mario remasters are real, next month has to be the time that Nintendo confirms them. And if they don't, then maybe that means that rumor wasn't true. But, time will tell, you guys. We just have to kind of wait and see. So this is what I'm thinking about all of this stuff. Please share your own thoughts. I want to hear what you think. Do you agree with the negative fallout? Are you feeling optimistic like my last video said? Whatever you think, talk about it below. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob, a Rule of Two Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.